February 23, 1945. The island of Iwo Jima, a patch of black volcanic sand and rock in the Pacific, 8 square miles of the most heavily defended ground on Earth. On the summit of Mount Suribachi, a small group of Marines raises an American flag, and a photographer captures it. That single image will become one of the most famous photographs ever taken. But turn away from the mountain, look about 1,000 yards inland, and a different scene is unfolding that almost no one will remember. A short, slight Marine shoulders a 70-pound flamethrower and walks alone toward a line of concrete bunkers that have stopped an entire advance cold. His name is Corporal Hershel Williams, called Woody, 21 years old. A farm boy from West Virginia the Marine Corps had once turned away for being too short. In front of him is a network of reinforced pillboxes, squat concrete forts barely above the sand, pouring machine gun fire across the open ground. The American tanks cannot get through. The infantry is pinned down and dying. An officer turns to the young demolition man and asks whether he thinks he can do anything about those guns with his flamethrower. Williams will say all his life that he had no memory of his answer. The men who lived through it remember it. He said, "I'll try. To use a flamethrower against a pillbox, a man has to do the unthinkable. He has to crawl across open ground into the teeth of the very guns he is trying to silence until he is close enough to reach them, only a few yards away. On his back, he carries fuel that a single tracer round could turn into a fireball. His only protection is a handful of riflemen trying to keep the enemy's heads down. Most men never get the chance to be that brave or that exposed." Woody Williams about it over and over again for 4 hours. Across one of the deadliest stretches of ground in the entire war. Over the next 4 hours, Williams would go forward again and again, returning to his own lines only to refuel and to gather demolition charges. Then crawling back into the fire, he would barely remember any of it. But by the time it was over, he had cleared a path through a strong point his own regiment called one of the most fanatically defended positions they ever faced. And he would carry that morning for the rest of his life, 77 years of it, never once believing that what he won that day truly belonged to him. To understand why, the story has to go back to a dairy farm in the West Virginia hills. Long before Iwo Jima, before the flamethrower and the medal and the weight of both, there was just a small boy on a farm who wanted to be useful. To understand the man crawling toward those pillboxes and the decades he spent afterward, you have to understand where he came from and how close he came to never wearing a uniform at all. He was not built like a hero. He was built like 100,000 other hard-luck farm kids of the Depression. That, in the end, may be the most remarkable thing about him, how completely ordinary he started out. Hershel Woodrow Williams was born in 1923 on a dairy farm in Quiet Dell, West Virginia, the youngest of 11 children, several of whom did not survive childhood. He grew up milking cows and working the land through the Great Depression. When the war came, he tried to enlist in the Marine Corps and was rejected. At 5'6", he was too short to meet the standard. He kept after it, and in 1943, as the Corps' need for men grew, the height requirement dropped and Woody was sworn in. The Marines trained him as a demolition sergeant and taught him to handle one of the war's newest and most fearsome tools, the flamethrower. He saw his first combat on Guam in the summer of 1944, jungle fighting, close and brutal. Then came the assignment that would define his life. Iwo Jima, the tiny island sat halfway between American bomber bases and the Japanese home islands, and its airfields made it vital to both sides. The Japanese had spent months turning all 8 square miles into a fortress, honeycombed with tunnels, caves, and hundreds of concrete pillboxes, defended by more than 20,000 men who intended to make the Americans pay for every yard. There would be almost no cover and nowhere to hide. On February 21, 1945, Williams and the 3rd Marine Division landed on Iwo Jima's black beaches. The volcanic sand swallowed boots and vehicles, the gunfire was relentless, and there was no protection but the holes a man could dig or a shell crater he could fall into. For 2 days, the Marines clawed inland by feet and yards. By the morning of February 23rd, the advance toward the island's first airfield had stalled completely. Stopped by that belt of pillboxes, no rifle or tank could crack. And so, an officer turned to a 21-year-old with a flamethrower and asked the impossible. Woody Williams went forward alone. Covered by just 4 riflemen, he crawled out across the open sand toward the nearest pillbox, the air alive with bullets. He worked his way close enough to reach the gun slit, and sent a burst of fire through the opening, silencing the position inside. Then he turned and crawled back to his own lines, not to rest, but to swap his emptied flamethrower for a full one and to bring up explosive charges. Then he went out again. The Marines watching could hardly believe what they were seeing. One man against a fortress, walking back into it every time. For 4 hours he repeated it, a grim, methodical rhythm of advance and return. On one pillbox he climbed up onto the roof and put the nozzle of his flamethrower down through an air vent to knock out the gun inside. When a group of enemy soldiers rushed him with bayonets, he met them head-on. He used up flamethrower after flamethrower, going back through the fire each time to ready another. Behind him, as he tore holes in the line, the tanks and the riflemen finally began to push forward into the gap he was opening, position by position, yard by terrible yard. It was not a story of a single charmed man untouched by the battle. The 4 riflemen sent to cover Williams paid a price for it, and 2 of them were killed shielding him as he worked. He would carry their loss far longer than any wound. Years later, he could still summon one searing image: the eye contact with an enemy soldier charging out of a pillbox straight at him. Much of the rest was simply gone. A blank his mind seemed to have drawn over to protect him. He survived that morning. Days later, on March 5th, shrapnel finally caught him, and he was wounded, but he stayed in the fight until the island fell. When the 4 hours ended, the belt of pillboxes that had stopped an entire advance was broken, and the way to the airfield was open. It was, by any measure, an almost unbelievable feat of single-handed courage. Iwo Jima itself would not be declared secure for more than a month, at a cost of nearly 7,000 American dead, one of the bloodiest battles in the history of the Marine Corps. Woody Williams walked off that island alive, one of the lucky ones, and that simple fact, that he came home when so many did not, would shape every year he had left. On October 5, 1945, in a ceremony at the White House, President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around the neck of Hershel Woody Williams. He was 22 years old, a dairy farmer's son who had been too short for the Marines, now wearing the highest decoration his country could give. By every outward sign, it was the proudest day of his life. But almost immediately, something happened that would change how he understood the medal, and himself for the rest of his days. It came not from an enemy or a critic, but from the most respected Marine alive. The commandant of the Marine Corps at the time was General Alexander Vandergrift, himself a Medal of Honor recipient from Guadalcanal. According to Williams, the general looked at the young man and told him plainly that the medal did not belong to him. It belonged, Vandergrift said, to the Marines who did not get to come home. Those words landed on Woody and never left. This is the part of his story that is told least often, and if it is the kind of history worth keeping, consider subscribing so it keeps reaching people. Because what Williams did with those words is the real measure of the man. Williams took the general's meaning to heart, and it merged with a guilt he already carried. 2 men had died covering him. He had lived. For years he could not forgive himself for that, until, he said, his faith finally gave him a kind of peace with it. Out of all of it came a conviction he would repeat for the rest of his life, in almost the same words every time. This medal, he would say, is not mine. It belongs to those who did not get to come home. I just wear it in their honor. I am only its caretaker. He decided the honor was not a possession, it was a responsibility. Most men, handed the nation's highest honor, would have let it become what such medals usually become: a framed citation on a wall, a story told at reunions, a proud line in an obituary. Woody Williams refused to let it rest. He had decided the medal belonged to the dead, and he spent the next 7 decades making sure the living did something with it. The farm boy who fought for 4 hours on Iwo Jima was about to fight a far longer campaign, one that would outlast the war, outlast his generation, and outlast even him. For 33 years after the war, Williams worked as a counselor for the Department of Veterans Affairs, helping other veterans carry what he carried. Then, in 2010, he turned his conviction into something concrete. He founded a charitable foundation with a single mission: to honor Gold Star families, the families who have lost a husband, a son, a daughter in service to the country. Across the nation, his foundation began raising Gold Star families memorial monuments, the first substantial effort to honor not the fallen alone, but the families left behind. He lived by 6 words: "The cause is greater than I." The monuments spread to nearly every state in the Union, dozens upon dozens of them, each one bearing the names and the weight of local families' sacrifice. And the honors came back to him in turn. In 2020, the United States Navy commissioned a ship, the USS Hershel Woody Williams, so that the farm boy's name would sail the seas long after he was gone. The flag he had watched rise over Mount Suribachi that February morning had already been cast in bronze as the Marine Corps War Memorial, standing near Arlington, where it still draws millions who come to remember. Hershel Woody Williams died on June 29, 2022, at the age of 98, at the Veterans Affairs Hospital in West Virginia that by then bore his name. He was the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the Second World War, and with him a living link to that generation passed into history. His casket lay in honor beneath the dome of the United States Capitol. The story of the flag he watched go up is told in the book Flags of Our Fathers, but the truer monument may be the one he built. A man who spent 77 years insisting his medal was not his, and by giving it away made it mean far more. If your father, your grandfather, your uncle, anyone in your family served in the Pacific, on Iwo Jima, or any of those islands, in the Marines or any branch, leave their name in the comments below. Don't just leave the name. Tell us one thing about them. One thing they did or said, or one thing you remember. Woody Williams spent his life making sure the ones who did not come home were not forgotten. The least we can do is remember them by name. Subscribe if you want the next story. There are more of them, and they are still waiting to be told.